This is Capitalize Your Finances, the show representing you, a select group of excited, ready, and fired up listeners seeking to potentially maximize your money moves and get after it. We don't settle for generic advice of always and nevers. Our currency is our intellect, and we constantly seek the logical way of likely creating advantages to potentially maximize wealth for our personal and unique situations. The show brings you this step-by-step framework to capitalize your finances in the aspects of your financial situation, and we strive to explore strategies and ideas to potentially help you capitalize on your financial decisions. We are capitalizers, and this is our show.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Panayiotou, the Cap in Capitalize. And today we have one of my favorite guests of all time. I've been following this guy's career, pun intended, for many, many years. It is surreal to have him on the show, to go from an idol to a friend, a fellow investor, the one and only Guy Spier. Welcome to the show.
Chris, it's great to meet you. And I should just give a little bit of background. So my earlier, and to just bring us up to this point, earlier this summer, I had a 3-day trip to India. And then I was back in Zurich for a night. And then I went to Estonia, to an investment conference in Estonia, which was lovely, by the way. And there's a whole bunch of people who are social media influencers at the conference. And some of them are taking care of me. And these people were very active on Instagram, and I was not. And I kind of came back to Zurich and I thought, I need to investigate this Instagram and see if I can use it in some way. So I started getting, in case anybody's noticed, super active on Instagram, kind of a rabbit hole that I went down. I'm still not sure about it. But in that rabbit hole, I come across Chris, and it was like, I just enjoyed your personality. So I started texting with Chris on Instagram, and the next thing I know, here I am meeting you in real life. So that brings us to this point. It's a pleasure to be here and delighted to talk to you about whatever comes up.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you so much. And actually, it was funny. I remember talking to my wife about when we were interacting, because I know you're a popular guy, in particular on LinkedIn. And then I remember on Instagram, because you posted a picture, I believe it was a car show with Ferraris. And one of our best friends has the #1 classic car podcast in the world. And, one thing led to another. I think I made an intro or something. And then I'm like, well, maybe hopefully I'll hear back. And then I got a text from William Green saying, hey, have you reached out to Guy? And I'm like, well, you know what? I'll shoot my shot again. And here we are. And I wanted to tell you, Guy, I've got to admit something to you. Once I knew you were coming on this podcast, I actually struggled where to begin. And the reason why is you've given, not to pump you up too much, so much to me since I started following you when your book came out in 2014. And one thing I noticed when I was reviewing for this show is we have a ton of similarities in the fact that we were both lured into the Gordon Gekko-ness of our industry. And we were also disgusted by it after the fact. Yeah. And what makes you tick, it's what makes me tick. And it's about giving the bulk of your wealth back to society. And that's more than just money. Yeah. But I wanted to start off with a more personal question and go from there. So you've done well for yourself and your investors, and you've made it a major part of your life mission to give your wealth back, both in literal terms and renting out your knowledge. And so looking back, do you remember when you started to turn that corner in the giving mentality? And do you wish you could have started that process sooner?
I certainly wish I could have started sooner, because this stuff compounds, and the earlier you do it, you can actually kind of measure by decades. So I'm kind of well into my second decade of doing it. And I think that Monish is into his third decade of, so I just mentioned Monish Pabrai, from whom I learned so much. And he's in his third decade of doing it. And every decade is a new step jump, but it takes a decade, but those decades, so you just keep doing the giving, and then over decades, amazing things happen. I think that really genuinely in my case, I was faking it. And it was like a case of fake it till you make it. So I have read Cialdini's book on the psychology of influence. I love the story of the Hare Krishna guys who are in airports handing out paper flowers, and 10, 15 meters later, they're asking for donation, and the donation rate goes up through the roof. But I don't, Robert Cialdini calls it the compliance factor, I believe. And so I was saying, well, I'm craving success, and I'm saying, how do I generate reciprocation? And I'm finding all these ways and I'm improving in the ways that I generate reciprocation. But I was literally doing it for very, very selfish reasons. And then over time, what I realized, it made me feel good. And actually, I developed an interest in genuinely helping other people. But I would tell you that genuinely helping other people is the ultimate long-term greedy. I mean, it's just so unbelievably powerful, and it blows me away that people don't get it. And before I hand the mic back to you, just to reference something, you talked about being popular on LinkedIn. I just want to give you a little, there's, what's his name? Entrepreneur on Fire, John Lee Dumas.
Oh, yes. He came on our show.
Oh, he's a lovely guy. I never met him, but hello, John Lee Dumas, if you're listening to this. And, a value bomb. So this is something I've just realized. He talks about value bombs on his show. I love it. What an amazing guy. But I used to listen to it with my children. And so I started running an experiment on LinkedIn. I want to share this with your whole audience, especially with you, Chris. So, you know what? Everybody on LinkedIn, everybody is craving attention. Every single person is posting there, and they're posting as their own PR agent. Look, I got this job. Look, I did this. Look, I did that. And it's like, so I started running this experiment. I just started doing a simple thing that I would, if anybody tagged me in a post, I would pretty automatically repost them, but with some additional description. And it's amazing because people just keep coming at me with wonderful content, and I just keep reposting it. And that simple change in perspective, forgive me, I just wanted to address the LinkedIn thing. And giving of yourself, I think that, and to expand on it a little bit, is so it's the ultimate long-term greedy. If you have it with if you do it with the right intentions, it's even better. But even if you do it with the wrong intentions, it works. And it's the ultimate business tool, I would say. So
yeah. Well, and I've actually taken that to heart from you. One thing I've learned from a lot of these, and I don't want to use the term super investors because I know a lot of people don't like that term, but people that have built success in our industry. And I kind of get it because it's the chicken or the egg. You kind of need success before you can go and teach people how to give it, right? You got to prove yourself. But the one thing I've noticed is a lot of these people start giving back their gifts towards the end of their life. And you're fortunate in the fact that you got a long, knock on wood, runway ahead of you. And that was something that inspired me when I wrote my book and started the show, because a lot of these people go through their lives and then they get that sense of fulfillment toward the end, but they don't live the life to see how much it's helped everyone else. And so that's what actually inspired me to do all of the non-business related things. And, I'm only 32. So
yeah, I'm so envious. When I was 32, I hadn't even figured this stuff out. So, when I came into my second decade, I'm 57, but I really started figuring it out at age 35. I was kind of grasping towards age 32.
Yeah.
But and just something that just to correct, if anybody's interested, is that, so, you're 20 years old. It's hypothetically, somebody's 20 years old and they say, yeah, well, what can I give? I can't give anything. I'm an empty vessel. And I would say that, you can give a lot. So you can give, it's just a hypothetical 20-year-old who's not even finished college and is listening to this, like, so what can I give? You can give your attention. So just as all those people on LinkedIn are craving attention, even Warren Buffett, maybe he doesn't crave attention, but he appreciates the attention. And William Green has kind of given me, I see you. So many people, even on our various private WhatsApp groups, what gets posted, it's like, look at this amazing thing that I did. And what the person is craving is, I see that you did it. I know that you did it. And so even a Warren Buffett appreciates being appreciated. Somebody writes to Warren Buffett and says, you've made an enormous difference in my life. That is a gift that the person has given. So a 20-year-old, a 15-year-old can give that gift of attention, gratitude. And I would even say it doesn't have to be an appreciation of something good. I think that in my marriage, for example, and in friendship, sometimes I've said, I cannot take away the suffering that you're going through, but I want you to know that I see it and I appreciate that you're suffering. You're not going through this alone. And that also is something. And when people don't feel alone, and I'll just leave you with this before we see where you want to go. People don't care. I'm just looking out the window to make sure I get it right. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And people don't remember what you did. So I'll just pause on that. It's true for everyone. I know that you get this. Your clients, everyone, they care that you know your stuff, but what they really care about is they know that you care about them, and that you see them, and that they're real, and that they're individuals. And people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care is just a beautiful idea.
So that is actually a perfect tee up to a question I had. So there's an unwritten rule because there's two aisles of finance, right? There's the planning side, which is what I'm on, and there's the investing side, is what you are on. Although I like to, step over the line a little bit here and there. And there's this unwritten rule where professional investors don't share their process or their framework. And part of it, I get it, because if Warren Buffett, that one's the easiest, if he announces that he's buying XYZ, it's going to literally move mountains. But on the other side, I kind of find it a shame because, like I was saying earlier, so many people compound all of this brilliant knowledge and they leave this world selfishly with all of it. But I've noticed that paradigm is shifting from the likes of you, Monish, Howard Marks, and many others becoming much more open to their framework. Now, I'm not going to ask specifics about any investment or your fund, nor will I on this episode.
You can. I might share. You never know.
You never know. Okay. But from a general standpoint, what do you think is causing this sudden unveiling of the knowledge curtain?
Yeah. It's really interesting. Ray Dalio is somebody that you missed. That is also he's worked really hard to share some of his frameworks with the world, and so I think that probably I don't know. I'm not Ray Dalio or Warren Buffett, but I think it's certainly a more meaningful life, and that's kind of like this ethereal. But that doesn't help the average person. I think that what really motivates me is, again, like all this stuff that appears to be generous is actually just long-term greedy. But is a concept that I learned from another guy that I've met through I haven't met him in person, I just know of his work through social media, is this, the guy who comes to my mind, he's not the only one who does this, is this guy David Perel, who talks about this. David Perel, who's got this course called Rite of Passage, which I haven't taken, but he talks about learning in public. And he talks about how when you learn in public, you kind of put the algorithm to work for you. Because if I take something that I've thought up and I like the idea and I just keep it to myself, then not much is going to happen with it. If I find a way to expose it to the world, and there are so many different ways to expose my thinking to the world, I don't know who the algorithm is going to hook me up to, connect me up to, who's going to come back to me with something. So I think that in my case, the desire to share is also in part the desire to learn in public and to put the algorithm to work for me. And it's a strange thing that if other people do it, it doesn't diminish what I'm doing. In fact, it makes the world even more fun. So I think that probably Ray Dalio and Howard Marks, I'm sure that there's so much that comes back to them because they've kind of shared in public in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, yes, there's Ray Dalio. And the reason I wanted to pick three big ones, right? So I had to put you on the Mount Rushmore of name dropping, because Warren, it's obvious. Charlie, it's obvious, but you got to give yourself more credit. But it's fascinating. In the social experiment you were talking about. So I was just talking to our producer, Jeff Davis, before we started the show. And I had just gotten back this past weekend from Columbus, Ohio, for a speaking engagement. And I had a couple people, it's my first kind of taste of being an influencer, if you will, which is so weird for me to say. And a lot of these kids, 18, 20, early 20s, came up to me and they're asking like, how did you get to blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And one of the things I told them was much less sophisticatedly equivalent to what you just said. Get out there and basically just shoot your shot, get connected with as many genuine people as possible.
Yeah.
And then once you have this group, and you'll appreciate this, start narrowing down into the concentrated portfolio of the greats, because you won't get hurt by having certain great people not in your life, but you will get just absolutely demolished if you deliberately choose the really bad ones that were in your group.
Yeah. How great. So age 32, you got people are coming to you and following you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so funny because my answer in a certain way, what happens to me is I go, why are you following me? I'm just following Warren Buffett. I mean, you're welcome to join me, but like I'm not the destination here,
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, but you know what? That is the destination in a way, because you and I, right, we're big on cloning, and you've picked parts of Warren, picked parts of Charlie, picked parts of Monish, picked parts of people outside of investing, which we'll get into in a second, with maybe your family, which is what I admire actually the most about you.
Oh,
and I love your Christmas card every year. And we'll get into that. But uniquely, you've got all these things that you've cloned, but that's why people are following you, because you've picked the best of people you admire and you have constructed that into Guy. So I wouldn't sell yourself short on that.
And I would the hilarious thing is that I don't even think that I've cloned particularly well, And so what is incredible about this stuff is that even if you do it badly, you can get some pretty great results, Just imagine what would happen if you did it well. And something else that really fascinates me is that, plagiarism in university and academic environments is a big no-no.
Right.
But in fashion, in investment ideas, plagiarize away, clone away. There's nothing wrong with cloning. And something else, my experience has been that when I acknowledge the source of the idea, it never diminishes me. So it in fact enhances me. So I think there's something that is really beautiful. When I try as much as I possibly can to give credit to the person I learned the idea from, or the person that I've cloned, and it enhances, it doesn't diminish me, it enhances me, it enhances them. And there's something else that's fascinating, is that in the cloning, in the implementation of cloning, in a way, the idea becomes yours. I don't exactly know why. So and especially when there's an honesty about the cloning, the way I implement the same ideas that Monishers implement, they get implemented completely differently. And so there's an originality there, even though the desire is to clone. And David Perel said this, there's no new ideas. One of the things that David Perel does to write essays is he goes and reads very, very old books, and he gets amazing inspiration for them, but they're combined in new ways, Yeah.
So, well, we had a client who's a really good, has become a really good family friend. And that's the beauty actually of our business, right? Like when clients become really good friends, that is like the jackpot in my mind. And so she brought in her daughter because her daughter's just graduating, going to chiropractic school, and she wanted tips on understanding finances and business. And so I brought up the idea of cloning, and she kind of looks at me dumbfounded and almost like scared. She goes, that's kind of like plagiarism. And I go, well, I thought about it for a second, and I go, yeah. I mean, it kind of is, right? It's like legal plagiarism, right? But you're not doing it in school. You're just cloning the best parts of everyone in life. But it's neither here nor there.
I would say just a couple of things on the cloning idea for people who kind of are thinking about it. So I think that if you're cloning somebody's investment, obviously if Warren Buffett buys Occidental, then and I decide I want to buy Occidental, then I don't have to write to him and ask him permission. But I think if somebody has shared an idea with me personally, individually, and there's nowhere else for me to learn that, I think that I enhance my investing future by asking them if it's okay if I go ahead and buy and give them the chance. But that's something around relationship building. And I've found that when people have wanted to, they'll see something that I've done, not as an investing move, but for example, they want to set up a similar investment conference to mine, and they ask my permission. I mean, it's really kind of them. In a certain way, I'd never be able to stop them anyway, but the fact that they ask. So I think that there's politeness around cloning in certain circumstances, which can develop a better relationship. And one should be very sensitive. I mean, I know a story of somebody who was shared his idea for writing a book, and his interlocutor's response was, "Oh, that's a great idea. I think I'll do it too." And the friend was, I mean, he will never speak to that guy again because he felt like his ideas were being stolen. So for some people, they feel very proprietary about their ideas. And maybe their ideas are special, maybe they're not. But it's not for us to judge. And we need to tiptoe carefully around those, if you like.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Well, I wanted to switch gears a little bit on a more financial yet personal question. So as we know, and my listeners know, every year tends to get easier in the quest of building wealth with compounding, etc. And at the start of everyone's career, whether it's conscious or subconscious, the tendency to be greedy, all right, and this is where the greed comes into play, for financial success is inevitable since most people don't have it to start. And you mentioned in your book, and this is the direct quote, "Greed may be good after all," end quote. And you went on to explain that as long as it drives you toward your inner journey of spiritual growth and enlightenment, greed can be used for good. So with that said, even though my wife and I are financially fine, okay, I still have that feeling of worry when I almost didn't make it back in 2017. And financially speaking, it's safe to say that you've done plenty well for your clients and your family. But I'm curious as to what keeps you up at night as the biggest stressor for most, which is financial. It's no longer necessarily at the top.
Yeah, great question. So for your and anybody's listening's interest, and Warren, I think, so Warren Buffett has said, yeah, he's never had a sleepless night over investments and over money. And, with all my deepest respect to Warren, I don't believe that. I really don't believe it because I think that it's a human experience. And so I've had, I think that one sleepless night is too many, but unfortunately we all get it. And it's not that I lose sleep, but it's like going to bed with a worry in one's stomach that is like, my God, I hate the fact that I'm going to bed with this worry in my stomach. I have 3 teenage children, so I'm more likely to worry about all the shenanigans that my teenage children can get up to. But I've definitely experienced that, and it's not very nice. And every time I have experienced it, I've done postmortems afterwards to ask myself, what should I have done about it in the past? How should I have acted differently? And what am I going to do now to make sure that doesn't happen again? In my case, one of the key things is simply position sizing. So, I bought following Charlie Munger and a bunch of other smart people into Alibaba, and it promptly went down 50% on my purchase price. And it didn't bother me in the slightest because I have this rule that when I buy something, if I look at it and don't buy it, it goes straight up. But if I buy it, because God's got it in for me, it's going to go down by 50%. But because I knew that was going to happen, so to speak, I sized the position appropriately given my confidence in what was going on, and so position sizing. Well, that's one of the biggest things that has lost me sleep at night, if you like. And I think that. And experience understanding what kinds of things can result in me having my head handed to me and not doing them, and being aware that if I'm doing something like that, then size the position appropriately. But I would say that more recently, so what's happened to me is I have, and just for your interest, I run one portfolio, and one part of it is in things that would exist even if the apocalypse were to come. They're kind of designed to exist after the apocalypse, at least in my view. Doesn't mean the share price won't go down, but the business will be fine. And there are other things which have gone up many times or might go up many times where they might not survive the apocalypse. And as I've had investments, say in India, that have gone up 3 or 4 times, and then something happens in India that gives everyone a scare, and the thing goes down by 50%, but it's already a sizable position in my portfolio, and then there's an underperformance. That creates difficulty, unpleasantness, whatever you call it. And I've also experienced, that's the one side. I've experienced the other side where, I got the shares of Ferrari spun out to me through my fiat investment. And halfway through the pandemic, I decided that I was going to sell half of it. And of course, if I'd have just kept the money on the table, I would have way more money under management right now. And so it can impact you in both ways. And I don't know if that's a case of losing sleep, but it's a case of, this is the life we choose, to quote some well-known mafia guy. That is just goes with the territory. If you think you can go into the territory of investing and not feel unbelievably stupid and not feel blindsided by the market and not feel like you're an idiot on at least some of the days, then you're in the wrong business. Mm-hmm. But you're right that, and just to go to somewhere else, so that's kind of on the investing side. Yeah. So the key to feeling like one's secure financially is as much as, and I'm not saying anything new here, is as much about understanding your income and wealth than it is about any absolute level. And I can tell you that I've, through a lawyer friend of mine, he's told me about people who you can easily allow yourself to get into a situation where the knot under which you live is growing faster than your income or your assets. And that is just an unpleasant place to be. And if you can just make sure that your costs are growing at a lower rate, whatever that rate is, at a lower rate than your assets or your income, then you're going to live a really happy life. And my hero there is my father, actually. My father's incredible. His desires are so modest. And, but he flies a private plane. He loves flying. But, he, instead of owning some expensive latest thing for several $1 million, which you can easily buy, like some Cirrus single-engine aircraft, which is like this amazing thing, and it flies very fast. He buys a 30-year-old plane that's a total gas guzzler, but he only flies it on weekends, and the damn thing costs £30,000. And he loves it because the engineer that in the hangar where he goes flying has been servicing that plane for the last 30 years, so he knows it inside out. And so, and there's a part of my father that's just actually something that I shared with Warren Buffett, is that when we were living in Israel and my father was working in the seed sales, I believe, our idea as a family, I mean, I was a young child, but my parents' idea of a spectacular day off was to go to this hotel in Israel called the Dana Kadia Hotel, and to have a kind of like a chocolate ice cream extravaganza in a nice tall glass. And, they felt like so you can make yourself feel fabulous and on a very, very limited amount of money. And the key is not to allow those desires to outgrow your capacity to spend, if you like. And so that, I think that early in my marriage, my wife had less understanding of that. And from time to time, if we'd had a bad couple of years in the market, I would heavily rein back expenditure. And my wife wasn't sure what was going on. And I think that I do a better job now of when things are going well to kind of like just make sure that it's not getting ahead of how well things are going. And, a rich and happy life, for me at least, is funding the education of people close to me, not just my immediate children, but maybe nephews and nieces, so there's always places to spend money, places, but
Well, and I don't mean to, throw myself in there, but if you're looking for another child to fund college, we have a 7-month-old at home.
Exactly.
So I'm just letting you know.
Just saying.
And I will say, Guy, that segment right there, not to put the pressure on you, but when you come out to Omaha next year, which I'm going next year, I'm taking my talents to Omaha.
Cool.
You might have to come up to Tacoma, and we might have to make that segment an entire episode in and of itself. Now, I wanted to ask you, can you remember the moment when you transitioned your mindset to quote unquote becoming filthy rich to your enlightened state that you have today? But more importantly, during that moment in your life, what were some of the most momentous positive changes that occurred for you and your family?
I mean, one really important change for me was living in New York around 2007 and becoming more and more aware of how New York City creates states of envy in its inhabitants and states of desire for more or desire for better, and the treadmill of increasing amounts of work, but increasing expectations out of life. And it really is kind of summarized for me. I mean, I was actually just in New York a couple of weeks ago to drop my daughter off at Barnard College. I'm now a Barnard dad. But,
okay.
So I eventually got a car in New York City. It's expensive to have a car in New York City. You got to park it somewhere. And so you pay $500 a month. At the time, it's probably more now to park your car in a New York City garage. But, you can pay extra to have the car on the first floor as you get into the garage. And I imagined, I don't even know that Bill Ackman, that was like $1,000 or $1,200 has the car right there ready to go. So you wander into the garage, you don't have to wait for them to dig it out. It's right there. And that thought was constantly with me, that if I had more money, then I wouldn't think much of paying more to have the car right there rather than, so my apartment, really lovely block in New York City, but didn't have park views. And I'd been to, actually, Bill Ackman used to organize these singles nights to introduce singles to each other. And at the time, he had a beautiful apartment overlooking Central Park. And I couldn't stop myself from thinking, you're not Bill Ackman. You're not Bill Ackman. Bill Ackman's got, and it just so. And so I kind of sort of stopped and said, "What the hell are you doing? And how long are you going to live with this?" And these thoughts didn't arise when I was outside of New York City. They would just arise kind of from the ether when I was in New York City. And so the realization for me, and I remember my recollection is of it. I actually said something along these lines to my wife, where I said, "Look, if we want the maximum financial upside, probably the right idea is to stay in New York City. But if we want the best possible life in terms of fresh air and how our children grow up and whether, I said it's probably somewhere else." And so that was a shift in my, and what I was focused on, and a shift in what makes a successful life. And, this is something that my father repeats to me often is, and this is well known, famous or rich guy dies, and the question is asked how much, he was very rich, he had $1 billion, do you know how much he left behind? People want to know, and the answer is all of it. You got to enjoy yourself as you go along. And the richest guy in the cemetery or the richest guy in his 80s is just not a great place to be at all. And I've kind of in a certain way, what I am getting more, and I have rising poverty in terms of minutes left in my life, and actually, what do I spend my time doing every day? Where is the focus of my attention? And for me, I don't know what it's like for you. The days subjectively, they feel like they go by faster and faster. I can't believe how, after getting into the office in the morning, it's suddenly time to go home again. And I feel like it's just every time. So what was that filled with? And so that started in 2007 in those kind of like dark valleys of New York City, contemplating Bill Ackman and his Parkview apartment versus my non-Parkview apartment.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotou, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
Yeah. Well, and I want to transition to my next question, because I'm pretty sure you tapped into our Capitalize HQ, because every time you get to the end of a segment, it's like you know exactly where we're going to go. And one of the things one piece of huge inspiration I gained from you. So this was back when I was at UBS, and that's when I discovered you. Was so after you left DH Blair, you had to do everything you could to change your professional and intellectual environment. And my assistant and I, we recently moved into a new office, and I took your advice to literal heart as we installed a thinking room. So I have my own thinking room, and all I do is profoundly think about my clients' capitalized finances, and then in some instances, just my overall life. And it's been incredibly fulfilling for me. But once you moved to Zurich, and this is kind of where you teed it up, how long did it take you to get into that tranquil rhythm of successfully growing Aquamarine? And also, what does a typical day look like for you now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, moving to Zurich was a reset, a major reset. I'd bid with Monish on the launch with Buffett in 2007. Mm-hmm. We actually had the launch with Warren Buffett in the summer of 2008, and summer of 2009 we moved to Zurich. And I hadn't. I'd met Monish once or twice over a meal, and we'd talked once or twice by phone. But it was really around the time of that Buffett launch that we really got to know each other personally. And, I saw a guy who didn't live in New York City at the time. He lived in Irvine in Southern California, and he'd go to the office every day dressed in, sort of shorts and sneakers. And even in New York City in my own office, that's not what I did. And, but when we moved to Zurich, I was feeling quite battered and sore because it was 2008 or 2009. My portfolio had taken a substantial hit. I was licking my wounds. I had sincerely believed that somehow I could have a career where I wouldn't have any setbacks, and I was kind of like feeling hurt by destiny that, guess what, you're not immune. You're going to have some major career setbacks as well. And just because you went to DH Blair doesn't mean that that's the only one that you're going to have. Mm-hmm. And so, but I was living in Zurich, and one of the things that the reset was, I'd understood what I was going to do with my portfolio, and there weren't any major changes in my portfolio. And there was a calmness that occurred because, like the trams run on time here, and so everything runs on time. And so there's a kind of a tranquility that came into my life through that. And I had kind of consciously decided I was going to give up chasing after all the things that one can chase after in New York City. And of course, it's not even possible to chase after them out of Zurich, Switzerland. But I remember that around that time, I pulled an all-nighter to send out holiday cards because I'd been sitting on an airplane with Monish, and I'd seen him taking out and signing holiday cards. I thought, why the hell are you not signing holiday cards? So later that year, I signed all these holiday cards. So I was choosing to engage with the world at a distance. And I would tell you that another personality that really inspired me was Nelson Mandela, whom I can get into for a while. I'd like to take a moment with him, actually, because it really, it's really instructive, I think. So Nelson Mandela spent 20 or so years in prison. Now, we all think, or we'd be forgiven for thinking, that his time on Robben Island, he wasn't doing anything. And he was working on himself. He was developing relationships with other prison mates. But he was also had a correspondence with all sorts of people around South Africa and the world. And for example, he would write to songwriters and tell them that he appreciated the song that they'd written and encourage them to write more songs, for example. So this idea that even if you're isolated in a prison cell on Robben Island, on an island off Cape Town, you can actually, you're a full participant in the world. And the realization that here in Zurich, I could engage with the planet, even though I was here in Zurich, was kind of like amazing. And it was the freedom that was given to me from, in a city like New York City, you just feel like you've got to show up to stuff. And if you're not showing up to stuff, you're getting behind. Mm-hmm. Whereas you come to Zurich and there's nothing to show up to anyway. So being on Robben Island.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, my wife and I were looking at Zurich. And once I knew that obviously I was going to interview you, and it just looks like in the best way, God's waiting room. Like it just looks like absolute heaven on earth. So someday, although it's a pain in the butt to get out there, which I know was why, right? Like I don't think there's a direct flight from where we are.
Not from Washington.
No.
Not from Washington State, that's for sure.
Yeah. So we're going to have to make the trek out there one of these days.
There are direct flights from San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta. No, maybe not Atlanta, New York, all the normal places, but you live in a relatively remote place yourself.
Yes, we do. Well, and again, I'm not saying I'm the master cloner here, but that's something that was really big for us is, up north in the Seattle and Bellevue where, Microsoft millionaires are and everyone's just in this hustle bustle. We're in this little suburb of University Place outside of Tacoma, 45 minutes south of Seattle. And in a way, it feels Omaha-ish or Zurich-ish because it's just little suburbia. We don't, we're not drawn to the flashiness of the big cities. And like you've already said, it leads to a much more fulfilling and holistically healthy life. So it's a blessing. Now, I wanted to throw a curveball at you. So you mentioned earlier how we met on Instagram, and one of the common themes that we have in our life is we are both newbies to the world of Instagram. And for not being a lifestyle influencer, I've got to tell you, you have some of the best photos and videos that bring sense of calm and just relaxiveness to my mind. And, you've had some incredible bike rides and swims as of late. So I had to ask, on these expeditions, what is going through your mind?
I think that I was just looking just now. I co-posted with you because I was experimenting. I thought, well, let's see if I tag him. Will he post it? You did. So that's an image that was found so the woman who designed the cover of my book is a lovely lady. She's originally from Hong Kong. She now lives in Portugal. And I don't remember it was apropos of what, but I was literally experimenting. And I went through, folders, our corporate sort of like image folders. And I found that and I thought, let's try posting this. And then I had interacted with you. So I thought, well, let's tag Chris and see what happens. And so I've tagged Amy McDonald in the past. It's like singer-songwriter. She does not collaborate on the post. I've tagged Ferrari. Ferrari doesn't collaborate. But, you start with Chris and, maybe Chris is...
Thank you. Thank you. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, I think that in those wisdom quotes, they seem to work and people love to read them. But, and I think that I'm still learning on Instagram. People kind of get bored with, hey, look at this, look at this, where I was. But I'm proud of those bike rides and I really enjoy making those videos and relive and showing where I've been. And I used to go on paid bike trips primarily with a company called Divine and once or twice with a company called Bicycle Adventures. And then I discovered that Zurich right here is a cyclist paradise. I mean, you have dedicated bike paths. You could go on and on about how great it is. What's on my mind? I guess it's a kind of a resolution that I love this perspective. I will not lie on my deathbed and say, moments before I'm going to die, and say to myself, dang, I just spent too much time on the bicycle. And the thing that going on the bicycle gives me, or going for a swim across the lake, is just an incredible feeling. And it lasts sometimes, maybe not for days, but for at least for 24 hours or 48 hours. And every time I do it, I don't regret the time I spend outside. But I think that for really productive me, it's less possible now because I'm just older and it's just harder to do really, really long endurance stuff. But to go out for a whole day diminishes my productivity from writing, reading, all of those things. So it's like a perfect day for me is a couple of hours on a bicycle or a couple of hours doing sport in the morning. And then a productive day in the office doing other things, basically. But my wife, she wants to get me more into meditation. And I kind of say, my long bike rides are a kind of a meditation.
Yeah.
And I say kind of because I've done 3 days of Vipassana. It's not real meditation, but I don't know. I'm just in the zone. I'm in a special zone, a really happy zone. Actually, I can't say always, sorry, Chris, not always a really happy zone because there's concept with cyclists called the SADs. The SADS is when you get enthusiastic on a bike ride, and now you find yourself in the middle of nowhere, and it starts raining, and maybe the wind gets up, and now you got to decide: am I going to cycle back, or am I going to give up and take an Uber at great expense to me? So every now and then you get the SADS, but
well, in the SAD, see, it's funny. So, and I don't. So we have it's not a Peloton, but and I'm blanking on it. But regardless, we have a Peloton equivalent in our garage, and I use it a ton. And it's interesting because out and about, if I was in that position, and this is just my mental model, every time I go through a moment of SADS, whether it's in biking or for me, I've done drug-free bodybuilding for years. If I'm struggling with a rep, I have the flash and the spark of, okay, this is when most people get off the bike or they drop the weight. And then I just
don't do it now.
But there's actually a book. I'll send it to you. It has nothing to do with investing, but it's on high intensity training by Mike Menzer, who was the uncrowned Mr. Olympia of 1980. And, not to go on this tangent, and when my wife listens to this, she's going to roll her eyes because I talk about it all the time, but I'm rediscovering my love for my passion of bodybuilding through Mike Menzer. And it was interesting because he had this beautiful physique, and he was kind of the first fitness guy to ever get canceled. And it was because he wasn't promoting volume. He was promoting balance, and you can have your cake and eat it too in the world of fitness. So I'm actually going to send that to you after this episode, because I think you'll find it extremely enlightening. But speaking of books, because I've reread your book probably half a dozen times. Wow. And when I was rereading it for this interview, one of the pieces I don't know how I missed it, but I did, was in a profound way, and it hit me in a profound way, your description of how the uberly trained academic minds can be damaging to long-term success.
Yeah.
And, you go on to explain how you've got to have a nimble mind and operate adequately in a variety of environments. And for my career path, I personally struggled with that for probably the first 5 years because I wanted to know every aspect of my framework. But, once it clicked, it clicked. From your perspective, how soon did you realize that your mental Ferrari mind needed to become more of a hardy Jeep mind? And for those of you that don't know what that means, you need to go buy his book.
Well, yeah, and there's a second chapter which maybe motivated the whole book, is titled "The Perils of an Elite Education." And I feel like, so I it's funny because I've just been writing about this for a friend, and it'll come out in the next week or two. Probably by the time this comes out, it'll be there. And there's a kind of a tragedy of the person who was and is academically gifted, who has not learned the skills they need to succeed in the real world. And I was about 28 years old, and I was super, super frustrated because I was like, I had evidence to suggest that I was often the smartest guy in the room. But there were people without university education who were doing way better than I was. And it just really frustrated me. And I think that so I was doing a lot of Anthony Robbins seminars at the time because I was trying to find answers. And so it was around age 28 for me that I started figuring out that my excellent university education was not actually helping me. And I needed to look elsewhere. But there's this, one of the times I went to an Anthony Robbins seminar was in Hawaii. It was a 10-day course. And they did this exercise. Anthony Robbins did this exercise that, and just for everybody's benefit, when I bring up Anthony Robbins, there are plenty of people who say, well, he's a flawed personality. And my answer is, and I'll just sort of address it now, is yes, he's a flawed personality. So we all. He's not afraid to present himself to the world as who he is. Mm-hmm. And yeah, maybe he hides some stuff, but is he the first or the last person to hide stuff? The important thing for those naysayers, if you like, is that this guy, for one reason or another, was the guy who enabled me to take my head out of my rear end. And how many people, and there we go into salacious language, I'd been walking around with this elite education, and I had my head stuffed up my rear end. I was so caught up with so many things that I thought were important about life, but were actually not important about life. And who cares how it happened? But in my case, so it's not necessarily that I'm endorsing everything that Anthony Robbins does or thinks, but it was him who got me to pull my head out of my rear end and to look around and to see what was actually going on. So I'm at this Anthony Robbins seminar in, and I don't want to kind of, forgive me, because I've had some really powerful reactions to me mentioning this. I want to tell an honest story, and it was happened to me at an Anthony Robbins seminar in Hawaii. So the listener, if you love Anthony Robbins, that's great. If you hate Anthony Robbins, don't let that get in the way of the story. I'm not necessarily endorsing Anthony Robbins, not telling you to go into an Anthony Robbins seminar, telling you how I got my head out of my rear end. And so, and this is such a powerful story, and forgive me for the kind of the long preamble, but listen to the story, because I think that it has power. It may change somebody's life who's listening to this, even because it will communicate on a subconscious level. So we're sitting there, 2,000 of us, I don't know how many of us, in a big auditorium, some conference hotel, and he's like, we're going to play good frog, bad frog. Tony Robbins take out a frog, a stupid sort of like ragdoll frog. He says, I'm going to do things with this frog, and you're going to try and figure out when it's a good frog and when it's a bad frog. And when you figured it out, go and tell one of the people who are here, who one of the staff. And if you've got it right, don't tell your neighbor. If you've got it right, you can leave the room. And if you haven't figured it out, you can stay in the room. So you're like, I feel like I'm a smart guy, and I'm going to figure out pretty quick. So I figured it out there were some people who figured it out in 10 minutes and they left. And I figured it out about 2/3 into it. I was there for about 40 minutes. There were some people who were there for a full hour before he put them out of their misery. And so what he does, he said, I want you to look very carefully at what I'm doing with the frog. And it turned out that there was no visual signal as to whether it was a good frog or a bad frog. The signal was an auditory signal. But he misdirected us. So he said a certain keyword when it was a good frog, and he didn't say that keyword when it was a bad frog. But he'd misdirected us by telling us to all look really, really carefully. And, the amount of time that it took me and others to figure out that we had to stop looking and start listening for the signal of good frog versus bad frog. And this was an astounding lesson to me, because it showed that you can be as smart as you like. You can have good functioning brain, as good a functioning brain as you can have, as anybody can have. But if you're looking in the wrong place, you're just not going to find it, and you're not going to see the distinction that you need to see. And so, there's real justice for the people who've not been through elite university educations, because what happens there is your muscles get strengthened, your mental muscle gets strengthened in a particular direction. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that means that you don't see other things. And those other things that so this idea that there's a humility that I now have, because I fully understand through that experience that I can be in an environment fully activated, fully paying to everything I can possibly pay attention to, and I will still miss stuff. And there are things that I need to. So what happened to me somewhere around that time? I figured out that I had my head stuffed up my butt. And I didn't even realize my head was stuffed up my butt. Sorry for this sort of like colorful description.
We've heard worse.
I realized it, I needed to do something about it. And so it was around age 28, and I was so closed-minded, and I was so convinced that I had all the answers, and I'd suffered a terrible career setback. So that, just to give you another thought that's on my mind, and then I'll hand the mic back to you, and you'll kind of bring this conversation back to where you wanted to take it, is that, so we are all going to go through, unfortunately, very painful moments in our lives where we have our heads handed to them. We have our heads handed to us. Mm-hmm. Whatever we do, we should not award destiny a double victory, both in terms of causing us pain, but then not learning the valuable lessons. So the pain that we feel is what allows us to rearrange our internal furniture. We're not going to rearrange our internal furniture if life is going along swimmingly well and we're not feeling any pain. So in a certain way, I really believe this. emotions are a call to action. When we feel the pain of something that's gone wrong, that's an opportunity to rearrange the furniture, to adjust our priorities, to take something that we didn't think was important and make it important. And so we need to use that pain to adjust that. That happened. I was around 28 years old, and I realized that I had to actually take all of my intellectual knowledge and shove it somewhere else for a while and focus on a whole bunch of other stuff. And what I realized I needed to focus on was to stop trying to prove how smart I was, because guess what? Nobody gives a shit. And
No.
not only does nobody gives a shit, it makes them feel inferior. Or if they don't feel inferior, they're like, why is this guy trying to feel superior? And start actually trying to serve other people's interests. And to close this little diatribe with this, I'm blown away, Chris, by how many smart people I see and know who haven't figured this out.
Yes. Well, and it's, it's interesting. There was a book I read, and it's not an investing book. It's not a planning book. It's the book Business Brilliant, and it's in my office. And I wish I had it here because I'm blanking on the author, but I remember I read that early in my career. And I think when we all start out, we're a little insecure because we literally have no idea what we're doing. And that book opened my eyes. And what it talked about was millionaires and multimillionaires. And multimillionaires, what they were talking about is like people that are worth $100 million and more. And one of the facts I read, and I could be butchering it, but I think it was like 8 or 9 out of 10 people that are worth over $100 million are severely dyslexic. And wow. I thought about that. And as I was discovering this, I realized, okay, the reason why is these people understood early on they can't do everything. And a lot of them, by definition, are academically challenged because, they read backwards. And so they became this master at outsourcing, which allowed them to understand teamwork. They had to listen more, and that obviously led them to a higher net worth. So that would be the cherry on top to that diatribe, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I wanted to bring up...
Chris, while you were talking, I looked it up. It's called Business Brilliant by Louis Schiff.
Louis Schiff, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad, because if you didn't do that, I would have spiraled out of control. Now, in your book, I want to read a quote that I love. Quote, "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood." And that is by the late Theodore Roosevelt. Now, you've been a tremendous proponent of, at this stage in your life, stressing to those that follow you to enjoy the ride along the way. But going back a little earlier, let's face it, you and I can say that now, but when you were 28 and even, later on when you got hit in the teeth, if you will, in 2009, or when I was starting my practice, I don't think we were great at enjoying that ride because it was stressful. No. But looking back, if we re-engineered that or reverse engineered it, we could have been. So for our younger listeners, in your opinion, looking back on your career, what are some of the ways you could have began to enjoy the process of growth sooner?
Yeah, and what that brings up for me is I'd lived on West 67th Street. I'd joined a gym, and it was a fantastic gym, really fantastic. A guy called Pat Minocchia, former professional hockey player, in conjunction with the guy in the building, a billionaire living in the building not far away from me, had set up the perfect gym, and they were really into teaching the members of that gym how to take care of themselves. But in order to do that, you had to kind of like show up on a reasonably regular basis and become a genuine part of the community. And my heart wasn't in it because I was going to work at 8 and coming home at 10, and I was just giving myself over 100% to work. And I remember a lovely trainer called Greg Peters who kind of like looked at me and he was like, "You're getting this all wrong, dude. You're just getting this all wrong." And it's funny, you talk about weightlifting. He was an early proponent of this idea of functional fitness and was committed to giving the participants in the gym functional fitness. And I was nowhere near as fit as I could have been. It was I think that so my daughter just started at Barnard, and she was asking me a similar question, a similar kind of question. And I think that the framework that really is powerful for me is a distinction that I got from reading Danny Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And in that book, one of the distinctions that he makes is to think of ourselves as having one of the ways in which our personality divides is that there's the experiencing self and the remembering self. And so, the remembering self is that holiday that you took that was a total nightmare because the car broke down, you never reached your destination, you had to stop in some diner and your family were there making the best with some pretty crappy food. But wow, what incredible stories. That might be an example of something where the experiencing self did not have a great time, but the remembering self says, you know what, that was pretty awesome. Or I think of times when I've climbed a mountain, or when I've done a particularly long bike ride with the destination of being, so it's painful in the moment, but you look back and you say, wow, that was incredible. And then you can think of something which emphasizes the experiencing self, which is all the people who do drugs, get drunk, don't study for exams, but hang out with friends, and all of those things. And they have a great time in the moment, but they look back and they regret maybe the times that they spent because it doesn't give you anything today. I would tell you my experiencing self really enjoyed being a single guy in New York and dating women. But my remembering self doesn't draw much from that. It's not something that gives me much in my life today. It's nice for the moment, really nice for the moment. And so I think that what I would tell younger versions of you or me is try to take care of both the experiencing self and the remembering self. So, the person I want to be every day is somebody who engages in painful stuff that I'll look back and say, I'm glad I engage in that painful stuff because it brings me something today. Maybe it's studying, maybe it's looking at annual reports, maybe it's whatever it is, writing stuff. Writing is very painful. But at the same time, we need to take care every day of the experiencing self. So the person who denies themselves daily pleasures because they just want to have some fantastic future, but they are studying all day long, or like I was, going to work from morning to night and not giving myself the time to go to the gym or anything like that. So we just have to find ways to take care of both. And if the activities that we do, like if you really enjoy studying, that's a pretty obvious one. Or if you enjoy reading annual reports, perhaps that's a pretty obvious one. But I think that if we kind of try and find ways to include both, then that's kind of the recipe for a happy life. I don't know. I hope that helps.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotu, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
It totally helps. Now, you mentioned annual reports. So this is a finance podcast, so I can't not bring this up. And one of the things that I've cloned from you is don't check the price of a company's stock during trading hours. Now, it's probably a little easier for you than me on this side of the pond, but I've also admired your strength emphasis on the quality of an investment, whether it's stock, real estate, etc. And I actually mentioned this in my most recent episode, the endowment model, as of this recording. And you've mentioned in the past at times you could go a week or two without looking at a stock or the price. So my question, it's admittedly a little bit more technical. How often Do you look at the prices of companies you own, and what things would make you break that routine to check the price immediately?
I mean, so I have a Bloomberg software on my desk. It's currently closed. It's closed most of the time, but it's available to me if I want to open it up. There's also been a change in my working environment over the last 3 or 4 years, and that I used to maintain the spreadsheet of the portfolio myself, and now it's very, very capably and accurately done by somebody who's just like across the corridor from me. So in a certain way, as an organization, there's an awareness of the prices on a daily basis because things are being updated, dividends are being clipped and are being added and accounted for. And so so people close to me are doing that. But I really think that the real estate model is a good one. I mean, so what I have to be clear about here is that there are investments in industries where it would be nuts not to check the stock price, not just every day, potentially minute by minute, because you see an unusual, if you're invested in a biotech development company, you see an unusual, unexpected move in the stock price, that could be your best signal that the drug is not going to make it to completion, that they've actually been denied FDA approval. And so, you need to be on your tenterhooks, you need to be quick, you need to pay attention to that signal, do the extra research, make the phone call, make the move. And that is a stressful way to be. It's also true for anybody who shorts. If you're shorting something, then you've got to pay close attention. So what's important is to remember that I'm talking about not paying attention to the stock price on a class of stocks which look and feel like, unlevered real estate. And then you can ask the question, how many times do you check the price of your home? Do you speak to every real estate agent to see what they'd be willing to offer you on your home? No, you don't. You can go for years. I like the neighborhood. I like the house. But it doesn't apply to every single investment in the stock market. So that's really, really important. And I should add that I only try to make investments in things where I don't have to check the stock price. So I don't own any biotech development companies, for example. I don't own any technology companies that are reliant on a particular technology and developments in that technology. But every now and then I think that I get it wrong, even when I'm not intending to do it, and that I realize that a company I'm invested in actually is exposed to external forces that it cannot control that will really affect the long-term outcomes from the business. And so, even when you try not to do that, but if you select those kinds of investments, then you probably are fine never checking the stock price. Because what I've found is that one way or another, things come up that get you back engaged with what's the company worth today. And it might be that they produce an annual report, or there's a development, or, in my case, somebody from the corridor says, did you know that XYZ company just paid a special dividend, or there's a vote, or so those things come up. But it's a bit like checking the stock price as something. It's a bit like checking your iPhone. You don't have to tell somebody, remember to check your iPhone.
Yeah, right.
One of my children went on a course somewhere, and one of the first things they did, it was new for me. They took the iPhones away for like the first 2 or 3 days to force the children to engage with each other. When they gave them back, it was only on condition that they switched off every single notification, all notifications off, no signals from the phone. And then they said, look, over time you can switch them on again, which is a wonderful cleanse to do. It's a great exercise to do on one's phone. Just take it out, switch off every single notification, and then start switching them on as and when you need them. But you don't have to tell a teenager, please could you make sure you check your phone all the time?
Yeah.
Or anybody.
Right.
I think it's the same with stock prices. I think if you set the goal of never, you'll end up checking it about the right frequency,
Right. No, I agree with that. And one thing, and we spoke about this earlier, how you've optimized your life in Zurich and you've minimized the distractions to the best of your abilities. I've done this with my thinking room. A question I had for you, it's more of a personal one. And I know you've optimized your professional life with your move in Zurich, but in what ways have you optimized your personal life, in particular with balancing time with your wife and children?
one of the things that I've told young investing friends is get married early, because you just like sort that out in your life. All the energy that one can waste dating, trying to find the right woman, like figure it out and then get on to the next thing. I think that one of the ways in which, and my wife and I are celebrating 20 years of marriage this year, which actually I would tell you is a proud achievement for me. I think that it's not an easy thing to get to. I think that both my wife and I feel very fortunate that we didn't show up with many of the skills we needed to make a marriage work, but we showed up with the genuine desire to make our marriage work, and the genuine openness and willingness to learn what we didn't know. And I think that, speaking for myself, there were enormous amounts that I didn't know that I've had to learn and have learned. But I think that from my perspective of today, the thing that would be the most draining of energy in any marital relationship, including mine, would be an uncertainty of whether you want to be in it or not. Mm-hmm. And what I see with people who express uncertainty, and they're kind of like still in shopping mode, where they're like, I'm not sure if I want to put this product back. And I think that where I come at it from is that there is there are some questions not worth asking, because to ask the question is to just create uncertainty in and of itself. So, I have never asked myself that question. I think I'm married to an incredible woman, and I would rather use that energy to build a relationship. And the more I'm in the relationship, the more I realize how many opportunities I've missed in the past to build a relationship, but how many opportunities I've got now because I see more dimensions. And it's all the way from showing up at meal times with our children to, I learned and this is something that I was sharing with a few people recently. I was a guy who thought that kind of like white lies are okay, And so I'd feel super guilty. My wife is expecting me home at 7. It's 7:05, and now she calls to ask where I am. And the fact of the matter is I'm still at my desk. And what I want to say is I'm on the bus or I'm on the tram. And, and I learned not to do it because my wife, she's got eyes in the back of her head, but there's kind of like, and it's from this David Hawkins book, Power versus Force. When you even tell a sort of like a white lie, it makes people feel uncomfortable, and it makes them go, as in the words of David Hawkins, weak. And so I kind of learned to be super, super honest with my wife about all sorts of things that on the surface don't matter. And that builds the strength of the relationship because she can, there's so many things in my case that she can't rely on because I'm so bad with time, I'm forgetful, I'm all sorts of things. But there's the genuine desire to be honest about the world that I inhabit and to create that certainty for my wife. And I think that that's really important. And when it comes to children, I think that, I've seen marriages break up. And I think that to the extent that one or other member of the marital couple feel like it's okay not to behave well because the other person is not behaving well. And what I wish I could tell them, so I can't, some of these people are close enough to me that I could in theory tell them, so I can say it on this podcast and maybe they'll listen, or maybe somehow the message will get to them, is realize that, what you are doing, whatever you do in your marriage, your children, it will impact your children deeply. This marriage is no longer just about you. It's about who your children become. And, if you're a father or a mother, you are the archetypal model of a parent of either sex for your child. And I have this belief that even your secret actions, somebody who decides to be unfaithful, somebody who decides to mislead, your children are acutely aware of that in their dramatically, if not consciously. And so there's an enormous responsibility. And I'd go one step further, even that it goes beyond your children, goes to society. And it ultimately, the way we behave in our marriages determines the strength of communities, extended families, societies, countries. And we want to build. So, it's in my case, my relationship to my wife and our children has started with with a commitment to the marriage, a desire to not show up every time asking, does this suit me today? But to say, I have made a commitment to this. I'm the father of 3 children. I'll be the father to only those children. This is my wife. Now, what can I do? How can I invest in this? How can I make it better? And to realize that every day we're setting an example.
Well, and you talk about this importance of finding balance in one's life, and that in and of itself could be a podcast with us on its own. I've noticed in my life, because I love what I do, and your greatest gift is your greatest curse, this industry can suck you in to a detrimental effect. And I'm constantly finding new ways to balance my life, whether my wife and I are discovering a new restaurant, I'm playing a new sport, you name it. So do you have any recent new balancers in your life? And if so, what are they and how have they benefited you?
I'll share something that for me is become, I just wish that I had learned it earlier, and so glad that I've learned it now. And I feel like I have a far better relationship to Laurie. I should name her. I keep saying my wife. Her name is Laurie. She's a wonderful, wonderful Mexican woman. I love you, Laurie. And she's just, her sister has just flown back to the US today. But so the first thing was, in our case, in Laurie's case, what is a nice way to celebrate her birthday? I figured this out only 6 or 7 years ago. A restaurant with white tablecloths and a nice big glass of red wine and sparkling water is a great place to start. So I then realized I don't have to celebrate her birthday or an anniversary on the actual date. In fact, I started figuring out that we could celebrate our anniversary 4 times a year. I mean, why not? And the specific date doesn't matter. I realized that in order to really make it an occasion for my wife is I got to show up showered. I have to show up on time without business papers around me. And I have to make the reservation. And for the length of the dinner, I have to be 100% focused on my wife. And I really do believe that there's a kind of a communication that happens on a deep psychological level where it makes her feel safe. And when my wife feels safe, we probably all want to feel safe. That is the source of joy for her, a source of security, and subsequently a source of joy and security for me, because I have security in the relationship, and I feel like all sorts of positive things happen. And so, I've kind of really enjoyed finding ways to do that, always around a meal with white tablecloth. And the more often I do it, the happier we both are, I think. So I don't know if that's...
Well, one thing you just mentioned is the anniversary, not necessarily celebrating it just once a year. I mean, if anything, that is something that I'm going to take into serious consideration and cloning and implementing into my own life. And, you emphasized, and I actually had a ton of investment questions, but just due to respect of your time, I'm going to put those to side because, frankly, how many times have you been asked those questions? Millions.
I don't know. Maybe never.
Well, maybe never. But, for me, I'm getting and this is totally selfish on my part, I'm gaining the most gain from these emotional questions of your life. Yeah. And so we're going to keep that good vibe rolling. And, you've emphasized the importance of having the right people to discuss investments with. And I actually wanted to pick your brain on how these conversations go, as this is the one area I'm working on cloning. Because again, I'm stepping over the line into the world of investing. And I don't want to say specific investments, but hypothetically, could you take me into the mind of Guy and company when either you or one of your trusted peers wants advice on a particular investment idea?
Yeah, I mean, so where I would start, Chris, is something that kind of I get concerned about is when you talk about advice, because I learned it. So I don't ever want to give anybody advice ever, and it's maybe why people are interested in listening to me, because what I've learned is that people don't like being told what to do. And there's very good reasons why we ought not to tell people what to do. This idea that don't judge somebody until you've walked a mile in their shoes. How can I ever give you, Chris, advice? Do I know what it's like to be you? Do I know anything about the circumstances of your life? Do I know how you grew up? No, you can never recreate that. So there's enormous damage that we do when we give advice. By contrast, when we share experiences, when we share what is coming up for us and what the way something that is in the external world or something that somebody tells us connects up for us, we're providing a data point for the person who's with us. And you can tell, the person's physiology when you're giving advice is they lean back and become defensive. Whereas when you share experiences, people lean forward and become curious. And leaning forward and becoming curious is a far better place from which to teach somebody or to show somebody something. And you're always leaving them the space to make a decision about whether it's right for them and what the lessons are for them to take away. And there's something there about respecting human autonomy, actually, and not, every human is an end in their own selves. Every human has the right to configure their life their way, and every human ought to make decisions based on evidence, but ultimately it's their decision. So when it comes to investing, I'm not looking for people to give advice. I'm looking for people to share experiences and share insights. And one of the first clues for me is, how is this person talking about the investment to me, and how do I talk to them about it? So the kind of conversation that goes, hey, I just bought this incredible company, you should buy some too, smacks of advice, and you just kind of want to step away from that. And what does that mean? You don't yell at the person. You just reduce the number of conversations you have with them, especially about investing. But what I really enjoy is talking through something that I've seen in the business where my interlocutor, the person I'm talking to about it, sort of says, oh, that brings this up for me, or my experience here, or I was in a shop, and if it's a retail product. And so I've discovered that seeking out the people who talk about investments in that way, and then seeking to talk about investments myself in that way, has drawn the right people in, or the best possible people into my life. I don't know if that's helpful, but it all goes around this idea of not giving advice and sharing experiences.
It is very helpful, and I can share a quick side story. One of our previous guests, who you may or may not know, is Adam Cecil from Gravity Capital Partners in New York. He wrote Where the Money Is.
He's just written a book. I need to read it.
It's a great book.
I'm looking forward to it. It's on order.
Yeah, I would say, other than my book last year, which is completely unbiased, it was the greatest finance book I read. But on a serious note, he's become a really good friend of mine, and we had a conversation on an investment that I was analyzing. And it was probably and I thought, here's this guy, right? Just one of the kings of the industry. I'm just a little peasant. He's going to give me maybe 5 minutes and have me on my way. And we probably spoke for an hour. And it was very similar to what you said on, he wasn't giving me specific advice. It was a sharing of experiences. And for listeners tuning in, that is the biggest takeaway. And one thing I learned early on from one of my mentors is experience is not based on age. Experience is in the meeting. Now, that was specific to professionalism and growing a business, but that's no different than investing or lifting or biking or spending time with your family. So just because you're a young listener, that does not mean you don't have a tremendous amount of experience.
In fact, perhaps the most important experiences,
for sure.
I was taking one of my children around Williams College, which I'm so impressed with Williams College in the northwestern part of Massachusetts. And we were lucky enough that a really incredible investor, who I think it's okay to mention, Girish Baku, who used to work at Wayne Cunniff, is just a genius guy. And he happened to be walking us around Williams. And so my child, who's like 16 years old at the time, they start talking, and he's got in-depth research on people's usage of apps, and I got nothing to add, but my child, he becomes super curious about my child talking about how they use, I don't know, Snapchat and how they switch and whether they use video. Wherever it is, your experiences may be extremely valuable.
They are. And, out of respect of your time, I know, unfortunately, we are coming to a close, and I think we've went a little bit over. So I first want to say thank you for all of your time, Guy. And it's funny, I didn't even get through like half of the questions. So,
yeah.
We are going to have you back. But one thing I think this would be a good closer, there's a plethora of mental models that you've built in your life. And by many accounts, it's safe to say that you've been successful in living a fulfilled life, or how I think you would say it, the most fulfilling life that you could at this time. Now, I wanted to ask a more personal question as a new fellow girl dad. What are the best mental models you have made a point of passing on to your children?
I don't know if I've succeeded in part. That's so funny. I'll give you a hard time for a second. That is a question that is so clearly answered by a dad who's not the dad of teenage children yet. How old is your daughter?
Yeah. I know. That's why I'm asking. I need some advice here, because when we turn
how old is your daughter? How old is your daughter?
Our daughter Abigail is, as of this recording, 7.5 months.
Right. You got like 12 years approximately of a lot of physical work, a lot of hard work, and a lot of joy, and then around the teenage years, it all turns upside down, and the proverbial hits the fan. And so it's just hilarious. It's this guy is asking me what mental models have I given to my teenage children. I promise you, there is not one mental model that any parent of teenage children can give their teenage children. It's just like, that goes out the window. I would tell you that the transition from being the dad of non-teenage children to teenage children is about as fundamental as the transition from not being a parent to being a parent.
Okay.
And forgive me, because all parents of teenage children will understand this. And I hate to tell you, Chris, you won't understand this until you're the parent of a teenage child, but you don't have a clue.
Okay. Well, I don't. And it's funny you say that, because I remember when, I'm always a believer in trying to give back before people get to a certain moment in my life, in one's life. And, I was asking people questions before Abby was born in January, and every single person, and you're going to agree with me on this, is they came to the conclusion of, you won't know until you get there. Like, it's impossible to describe. And
exactly. The best thing is I get a lot of sleep.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? 99% of those comments kind of irk me, because I do think you can gain some idea of something before you hit that destination. But the second Abby came out, that was the one moment where I go, nope, everyone is right on that. So I'm trying to gain nuggets.
Yeah, but I'll answer your question. I've figured out a way to answer your question in a substantive way, which is good news. So I don't just have to make fun of your naivety when it comes to giving something to your children as they grow up. They say that the best teachers they're actually examples. They're not teachers. And what the best teachers do is that they inspire their students to learn whatever it is, but they inspire their students. They don't actually teach them, and it's the teacher's enthusiasm for the subject. So I think that, I really believe this. So I believe there are no secrets. I believe that all of one's actions are kind of imprinted on our children, and all the way up to age 14 or 15, our children live in a kind of dream world. Their minds, the way they experience things is very profound. In Switzerland, when they count the number of years you've lived here, and you need a certain minimum in order to apply for citizenship, the age between something like 12 and 16, they count double years, because it's such a formative period of your life. So where you were, that you kind of count double years, basically. And so I think that, more than kind of, if you're religious, responsibility before God is responsibility before your children. Understand that. So what's a practical example? My wife and I have had multiple arguments. Like marriage is disagreement. It's through the disagreement, it's through the arguments, through the fights that we actually learn and grow. our children should be exposed to that. Our responsibility is to reconcile ourselves to each other, to demonstrate to our children that we can learn the skills, or that we have the skills to reconcile ourselves to each other when there's been the most minor misunderstanding, like I didn't pass the salt at the table, to a major misunderstanding, like, some of the worst times in our family were where, I was on business trips and I was away for 2 weekends in a row, and my wife was there with 3 children, and I'd come back and, we were not happy. She was not happy. As a result, I was not happy, no matter how successful the business trip was. And the process of repairing those wounds, repairing that damage, how do I give my children the confidence that when things go wrong in their life, they can repair the damage? Well, I have to be an example. I have to show them that I can repair damage with them and with my wife. And I just think that model of, and I'm actually drawing on, I'm not sure if I'll quote the books right, but it starts with a guy called Bowlby, who writes about attachment theory. And then it goes on to a guy who's used to teach psychology at University, UCLA, and I will not remember his name, unfortunately. But the idea is it's the concept of dyads. And dyad is a kind of like 2 minds that are kind of interacting in a very, very close way, and where the actions of the one have an effect on the other, and it reflects back to the. So to transmit the model, not an intellectual idea, the actual model of the capacity to reconcile, the capacity to listen to somebody with whom one profoundly disagrees, and still, respect them and understand them, and to actually live that, I think is the most powerful model we can give our children. I can say that is not an easy thing to do. I was just talking about this to somebody last night. It comes up because my wife and I, 20 years married, we got married, and within 3 months the marriage was falling apart because we had no skills to deal with disagreements. And we were very, very luckily in New York, and we went to some amazing marital counselors who started teaching us some basic skills, which was kind of like learning to ride a bicycle. Neither of us knew how to do it. And so that is the model that I'd want to give my children. And in everything, I would say I come home to my wife lying about when I left the office and why I'm late. That's something that my children will absorb in one way or another. I raised my voice. That was something in my family. That's something that my children will absorb. I failed to apologize for something. That's something my children will absorb. I successfully ignore my wife after I've pissed her off. All of those things, there's the enormous responsibility, I would say. And it's through our actions and through the way we treat our spouse primarily, but the people around us.
Well, that is the perfect cherry on top to the end of this interview. Now, before, Guy, we let you go, where can our capitalizers go to connect with you?
So I would tell you that if you impress Chris well enough and you come with his recommendation, I'll certainly pay attention. So the first place you should go is Chris. And then effectively what I'm doing here, by the way, is I'm saying, hey, Chris is a gatekeeper. So if you really want to find your way to me, talk to Chris, and maybe you'll convince him that he will make a special introduction. And by the way, that's just a smart move in life, is have great gatekeepers. So thank you, Chris, for being a gatekeeper. So first port of call is Chris. And, I would say that it's Guy Spier on Twitter. I'm far less active on Twitter. I don't know what's happened. I don't know if it's Elon Musk changing the algorithm or something. I just find that when I post stuff there, I go there to have a nice conversation with people I know not so well and strangers, and somehow that's not working. What's really working well for me is LinkedIn. I seem to have lovely conversations on LinkedIn. And so you're welcome to find me on those 2 places. I've been playing with Instagram. I don't know where it'll go. You're welcome to find me on Instagram. And, I have an email newsletter that I send out. It's now going out once or twice a year. And so, if you want to hear what's on my mind, then that's a good place. And if you send me a message through Twitter or LinkedIn, I will eventually get to you. So, but by far and away, the best way is to go via Chris. If you come with Chris's recommendation, I will certainly pay attention.
Oh my gosh. Well, Guy, thank you so much for tuning in. And for you all that have listened through this entire episode of Capitalize Your Finances, For you newbies, welcome to the fam. For you newbies and veterans, if you have any questions about today's episode, you know the drill. You can shoot me an email, chris@capitalizeyourfinances.com, or you can give me a call, 253-214-3050. And my gatekeeper, Betty, will have the proverbial iron curtain. And if you are great with Betty, you're going to be great with me. If, for whatever reason, you want to be a guest on the show, or you have any questions about today's episode in particular, you can go on to capitalizepodcast.com, shoot us a message. I look at it every single day. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Panayiotou, the Cap in Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing.
You should always seek counsel of the appropriate advisor prior to making any investment decision. All investments are subject to risk, including the loss of principal. This material should not be considered a solicitation of an offer to sell or buy any specific security or offering. Investors should consult a financial professional to determine whether risks associated with an investment in the shares are compatible with their investment objectives. Christopher Panayiotou is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Capitalize Your Finances, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Guy Spier and any other individual or company mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with Capitalize Your Finances or LPL Financial.